Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. XCC, hello and welcome. XCC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling.
I was a one-man crew for the whole shoot except for that one shoot. So I hired a sound person and a camera person because I needed to be vulnerable. I needed to show my vulnerability. I needed to create a situation where I didn't have control. So that was the only way I could do it, you know. How do you be vulnerable when you're the one in control of the filmmaking?
Hello and welcome to the Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 89. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Every once in a while, a young filmmaker comes out of nowhere and takes the doc world by storm. Their name suddenly starts popping up everywhere, whether it be in film magazines, film festivals, newspapers, entertainment shows. Morgan Spurlock did it over a decade ago with Super Size Me. Before that, of course, you had Michael Moore with Roger and Me and Steve James with Hoop Dreams. This year, Bing Liu's name keeps coming up, and his doc, Minding the Gap, it seems to be all over the place this past summer. So when Tim Wardle, director of Three Identical Strangers, who was on fairly recently here on TDL and back in episode number 85, he recommended that we have Bing on the program, I definitely took note. And so being the diligent doc filmmaker and host of a doc filmmaking podcast that I am, I decided to investigate into this Bing Liu and this Minding the Gap a bit further. And what I discovered made me immediately reach out to this young man from Rockford, Illinois. His film won the Sundance 2018 jury for Breakthrough Filmmaking. He was essentially recruited by Kartemquin to come on as co-producers. Steve James not only came on as executive producer of Minding the Gap, but Steve then asked him to story produce and DP on a handful of episodes of his own current docuseries, America to Me. Bing was also listed in Variety magazine as one of 10 documentary filmmakers to watch in 2018. And so for today's program, I'm happy to sit down with Bing and have a candid conversation about his experiences in the film industry, his life in Rockford and in Chicago, Illinois, and of course, his exhilarating documentary, Minding the Gap. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Documentary Life. Bing, welcome to the program. It's exciting to be speaking with you.
Thanks for having me.
Bing, we often will to get some sort of context on who we're speaking with, we'll often start with a little bit of background on our filmmakers. I know that you worked in Grip and Electric, worked in G&E initially, and then moved into the camera department as an AC. How has working, well, I guess a couple of things here. You were filming your friends, of course, for Minding the Gap as well, and you were doing this for a while now. I'm curious what came first. Were you working in the industry first, or were you shooting skate videos, really? Which one came first? And then how did working in the industry commercially, how did that kind of help your documentary filmmaking?
I'll lead by saying that they weren't really my friends. They were people that, one of them I had met in my mid-20s when I started Minding the Gap in earnest. And then the other one, we had skated a few times as teens. But, I did start filming skate videos when I was 14 or 15. And then, I did my own films even. And then, when I was 19, I was going to school at the time. I went to community college, and then I went off to four-year university to study literature. But while I was doing that, I got an opportunity to there was this guy who was this local 600 camera assistant who had worked in all the major Chicago productions like Batman and Superman and stuff. And he had moved to Rockford, which is about a couple hours west of Chicago, where I was living at the time, to start a family. It was just a lot cheaper to buy a house and, have a bigger lot. And so he was sort of reinventing his career at the time. He was not burnt out, but just, wanted to maybe try a different avenue in his career. So he bought a grip truck, a bunch of, old ratty C-stands and Lowell Richardsons and stuff, But so he was doing all these commercials and, ad work in Rockford. And he was just doing it by himself for the first year or two, and he was getting really burnt out. He just really needed somebody to help him. And at the time, he had a studio in downtown Rockford, and I got wind of him because he would rent out his studio space for things like comedy shows. So I made a music video for my friend, and we were watching it at his house, and another friend of his was over who was a comedian at one of those shows. And he was like, "Hey man, you do great video work. Can I, give you this card for this guy who I know he's looking for an assistant right now?" And so I took his card and I was like, "Oh, cool, awesome." And I called him. I just cold called him. I was like, "Hey, my name's Bing. I'm just this local person who does video work. I heard you need an assistant." And he was like, "Yeah, what are you doing tonight?"
That's how it often happens, isn't it? The door's open and you got to jump into it.
Totally. And so, from there on out, it's he just really took me under his wing and, taught me all this stuff about grip and electric. But he would also bring me out on bigger jobs.
I was going to say,
to intern in the camera department or be a camera PA. And so I was really getting the best of both worlds in terms of, the craft of cinematography.
Absolutely.
But especially lighting. It was just, so invaluable to learn, the in and outs of that. Actually sort of lost touch with him for a few years, and I saw him recently because we just had our Rockford premiere of Minding the Gap.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what was that like? Okay, so you brought the film to Rockford and you invited your friend and mentor to see the film. What was that like? Because it sounds like he was fairly instrumental in getting you work in the industry. And then this is your documentary film that you've been working on for a while. Did you get to talk with him after you saw the film?
I did, and that wasn't his first time. And I just want to give a shout out to his name.
Yeah.
This is Tom Sekura that I'm speaking about.
Okay.
He actually came out to Sundance because he was so just over the moon about us getting into Sundance.
Fantastic.
And he brought out some of his staff, and many of them had grown up in Rockford. So that's where he first saw it, and he was just so proud of me.
I'll bet.
And it was a really heart-touching to hear his, just to see his response.
Those are great moments. That's fantastic.
Are you gonna put me smoking weed in the thing?
Maybe. Dude, I don't think just to do it.
I've given you free range. I have no stipulations.
I've always needed more out of life, more out of where I was. My parents ran this very controlling house, and so I ran away a lot. By 16, I was no longer living with my parents, at all. I just wanted to fucking skate.
You ready for some fucking intense action? Take one. I want to make a montage.
Say hello to the video live.
Hey, do it again.
I can see that thing in there moving around, Bing. I know you're playing with my face or something.
Stop filming and he's going to crash.
Hope I get there right on time.
Somebody film! Somebody film! Oh shit, there's a cop.
How long were you filming Minding the Gap, and how long were you working on the doc while you were also, paying the bills, doing the commercial gigs? And how did the experience of working commercially, how did that help you get a film like Minding the Gap made?
I mean, it certainly helped financially. Like, I bankrolled Minding the Gap on my own for 4 years. I mean, I started in 2012. I was coming off a couple, so I was always doing these personal projects on the side, but so I started working as a G&E when I was 19, and then for this guy, and then when I was 23, I was able to join the Cinematographers Guild. He had an opportunity to hire me as a second AC that he was pulling focus on for this movie with Zac Efron and Dennis Quaid, and I just, from that job, there's a lot of stunts in that movie, so it was like they were hiring additional camera people all the time. So I basically met every single Chicago camera department member through that movie, and they just they saw that it's not hard to tell who's sort of a hard worker and a smart worker,
Right.
So I just kept getting hired after that movie, and and so I was always doing these side projects though. I had done this short doc about these two Vietnamese immigrants who were both moved to Chicago in '93, and it was very much about them finding their identity and also this family trauma that they had both experienced in very different ways. And then from there I had done this it was like this skate doc about like skateboard videographers and photographers, and it was more like this meta look at like why, or like what is the effect and what is the reason for all this capturing of skateboarding, because it was getting like ridiculous. I was just like I'd be going out and there'd be like more photographers and filmers than skaters at a spot.
It's pretty amazing.
And it's not like these aren't sponsored skaters,
Right,
it's just
right.
like this is all very DIY. So I was really examining that. But through that, and conversing with a lot of skate filmers and photographers, I discovered like a lot of just these dark, deep, feelings that people really wanted to get off their chest. And so I was like, well, what if that's like the seed for the next project? And so in 2012, I just, I was traveling and skating anyway. So I just started interviewing skateboarders about, just their relationships with their parents, like what heartache feels like to them. Do they ever feel lonely or depressed? And there were some clear patterns of trauma and abuse that, was prevalent. And then a year in, I went back to Rockford, and it was, just another stop on my tour to do this project. And that's where I met Kier, who becomes one of the main characters in Minding the Gap.
When I was younger, I didn't really understand why my dad would talk about being black so much. But I remember he was like, if you could choose again, choose to be black. And at first I didn't get it. I was like, why would you want to be black when all this shit's happening to us? But he explained it as like, because we have to deal with these issues, it just makes other things that like my white friends would complain about, like not even be a problem to me.
He knew me growing up because he watched my skate videos, but for me it was like I filmed him getting into a fight at the skate park once. Right. And I was able to sort of use that later and source footage from other people when he was older, when I had moved to Chicago already. But so a year, you know, like at the time I was a few years into working in the union, making a pretty good career there. I was, you know, on track to work my way up the camera department. I was one of the guys that would always get called. And so, you know, it was like, oh, let me just do Minding the Gap, and that would be my next personal project. But then in 2014, there was an app, like my friend who I'd met on a commercial, his wife was doing outreach work for one of Kartemquin films. And so she was like, hey, you know, Kartemquin has this fellowship for filmmakers of color called Diverse Voices in Docs. You should apply with your documentary. And I was like, okay, yeah, let me look into it. And it was, you know, it was like, there's like 2 days before the deadline.
Yeah, of
and I was
course.
like, all right, let me just fill this thing out.
Again, another door opens up and you have to jump in.
Exactly. Yeah. But then I ended up getting in, and I had never heard of Kartemquin before. I'd never seen any of their films. But I showed up, and
not even Hoop Dreams. You hadn't even
not
seen
even Hoop Dreams. No, I was so in the dark about all that, that whole world.
Yeah.
But of course, once I did the fellowship, you know, and what it was 6 months, once a month you meet, and for that once a month meeting, you know, they focus on just a different aspect of independent documentary filmmaking.
Yeah.
You know, so the first one was very much about writing like a synopsis, writing a log line. And, you know, if you don't have a title, coming up with a title. And at the time, my film was not titled Minding the Gap. It was titled Ennui and Amour. Just, you know, being an English major that I am,
yes.
I just found those words really fast, really beautiful. And so, you know, through, I think that first or second session, that's where I was like, okay, let me come up with a better title. And Minding the Gap was just this phrase that I'd heard over the years.
Well, I always assumed
where it came from.
Yeah,
you know?
Which is interesting because for me, so my wife is British, and in fact, we are relocating here as we speak back to the UK, and Mind the Gap there means something entirely different. And when I first started hearing the title of your film, I assumed it was a doc in the UK, and it was about public transit.
Right. I mean, in hindsight, like I ascribed this meaning to it now, where it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, public transit and the subway, like it evokes, you know, even that is, you know, maybe it's a stretch, but you can analogize it to
totally,
you know, it evokes this feeling of public movement, of like, you know, urban movement.
That's right.
You know, really stepping off a platform and like just going somewhere really fast, which is so, yeah, I mean, so in working with Kartemquin, it's like, they were like, oh, well, you know, we do verite films. Yeah. Like, well, what is verite?
Yeah.
Like, watch some of our films. And so
maybe you could show me some of those.
Right. And it was like, okay, well, how do you, I mean, what do you do? And Gordon Quinn, you know, he was like, well, back in the day, we used to shoot on film. We'd roll, you know, it was really expensive, but so we'd roll audio tape, and we'd hang out, and every once in a while when something interesting happened, we picked the camera back on my shoulder and we filmed. And I was like, oh, that's kind of like what I did as a teenager.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Like, so it's like, okay, let me try this out. And so at the time, Kier was, you know, someone who was part of this ensemble of characters.
Right.
It became more economically feasible to follow him, because I had like gone out to Portland, Oregon like 3 times. I'd like kept going down to St. Louis.
You know, I lived in Portland for 25 years.
Oh, really? Gotcha.
I mean, I've spent half of my life in Portland. That's where I worked in the industry, in commercial and doc, was up until a year ago when we sold our house there. I lived in Portland forever, and it's a huge skate town. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Burnside is his skate history.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so it just became more economically feasible to just go back to Rockford almost. So
that's wild.
And it wasn't, you know, so it was just like, well, Kier's in Rockford, let me go back there. And,
yeah.
Oh wait, Zach, this other guy that, you know, I knew as a teen, like he's about to become a dad. Like that'd be an interesting story to track.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I mean, working with Kartemquin, after the 6-month fellowship, they were just so interested in the project, and I got to hand it to Tim Herzberg, especially. He just kept hounding me and saying, "Hey, you got to come in and let us know how the project's going." And then at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, they were like, "Hey, we want to bring you on as a co-production. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, I'm just doing this thing on my own.
Bing, are you telling me that they approached you then ultimately to come on as co-producers?
They did, yeah. I didn't even know that
Amazing.
That was a thing.
People,
yeah.
There are doc filmmakers that dream of such a thing, Bing.
Well, now I'm like just so appreciative and grateful.
And we've had a bunch of people from Kartemquin, including Gordon, of course, and Steve James on the program. And one thing that I've never gotten out of this, and maybe you're the perfect person to talk to, is, can you give a snapshot for our listeners? What does the day-to-day life look like when somebody like Kartemquin comes on as co-producer? How does that change or evolve things for you when you're working on a project like Minding the Gap?
I mean, they love fostering first-time filmmakers, and so I'm fit that demographic. And on an emotional level, it just feels really validating, and it gives you this fuel. This emotional feel, which is so hard to sort of sustain as an independent documentary filmmaker.
Oof, we talk about it all the time.
And yeah, so it's like, wait, so the Kartemquin films, the people who did Hoop Dreams, who've been around since the 60s, who, have had a fundamental effect on documentary filmmaking in the US and arguably the world, what they want to do this project with me, and they want to throw their support behind it. I mean, that's huge.
Incredibly validating, and there's not only validating, but there's almost it's very empowering, right?
It is. So I mean, I actually kept telling Tim, I'm like, how does this work? How does this, so I was figuring it out for a long time, like my relationship with Kartemquin.
Yeah.
But it's, like they're sort of, it's like loosely structured. They started as like sort of a commune.
Yes,
like
that's right.
Not really,
right.
But yeah, I mean, it sort of has that, that spirit. And so you just take.
Well, then even the name was formed that way in many ways.
It is, yeah. So it's a portmanteau of the three founders' last name, with Gordon Quinn being the Quinn of Kartemquin.
Yeah.
And so on an everyday level, I mean, we would just keep in touch. Like I'd write grant applications, and it felt really good to be able to put like, oh yeah, I'm co-producing this with Kartemquin.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of the strategy for our time working together, was just like, let's write grants and try to go for it.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the first things that they were able to do was to get me into Tribeca.
Yeah.
All access, which is which includes this 2-day industry pitch session. And so that was my first experience. And now I feel like I'm very familiar with these meat market type of settings and like.
I think it'd be great for our listeners to get a snapshot of what that meat market type atmosphere you're alluding to, what that looks like, and how you were navigating that. It's
funny. I wrote like a 10-page blog post about that experience.
Oh wow! Please share that with me offline.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes.
I don't know if it's public anymore because it's so. Oh. But at the time, I was reading a lot of David Foster Wallace's nonfiction work.
Yeah.
So I was like basically doing what David Foster Wallace did on that cruise ship or at the Illinois State Fair. Except I was doing it at Tribeca. It was very, Tim wrote me afterwards when he read my post, and he was like, you treated it like you were an alien being, like you were just micro observing how strange everything was. And it was, it's like I'd never been to a film festival before, much less Tribeca.
Yeah.
I was just navigating, the strangeness of these different types of badge passes that offer different types of clearances.
Levels, yeah.
And there's this like sort of posturing that goes on every time you talk to someone else with a badge.
Oh,
people are trying to size you up.
Yeah, they're looking at your badge, not your eyes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my eyes are up here. And it's not and like the different sort of lounges that depending on what type of badge
Oh
you
yeah,
can get,
oh
like,
yeah.
and then like just all the levels of sponsorship that are happening, like just the amount of swag that's, you know, people are sort of jockeying for in terms of like just space.
I mean, depending on who you are, it can be a real big turnoff, man. I mean, I think both you and I are cut from similar cloths that way. What were you doing to help yourself kind of get through it and maybe have a better understanding of it? Because I'm sure at some point you're like, I got to either do this or find a way to be okay with this, or I gotta not do this at all.
I was literally, I mean, I was just writing. Like I was like, I would just go hang out in the filmmaker lounge and just like write about, you know,
what you were observing,
what I was observing, and like how, you know, like my way of dealing with it was just like pointing out, like, and accepting and leaning into the fact that it was all very constructed. And so yeah, it was. And then so I sort of wandered around the festival and like got my bearings for a couple of days, and then there was this day where we got, you know, trained to do our pitch. So we spent a day with some of the other filmmakers who were there also pitching their projects, and we workshopped, you know, we like practiced pitching to each other, and I just found it so daunting. Like I felt like I had multiple panic attacks that day because you know, I'm such an introvert, and I was so precious about this project, and it was so close to me, and it's still difficult to explain what Minding the Gap is, right? It's about a lot of different things.
Over the last few years, as we've met and connected with more and more doc lifers, we've been asked what the most comprehensive doc filmmaking course out there is. The truth is, we didn't believe there was one. There are plenty of videos and some courses that walk you through some technical aspects of filmmaking and workshops that cover some of the business aspects, but there was nothing that specifically took the doc filmmaker through the whole actual doc filmmaking journey, both creative and business, from A to Z. That is, until we created one. The Documentary Academy is the only all-in-one online documentary film production course that actually starts from the beginning of your film's journey, from story conception through pre-production and actual production to post-production and through to the promotions, marketing, and distribution of your film. The Academy will help you make your most successful documentary film by guiding you on the journey from conception to launch. But don't just take our word for it. Have a look for yourself by going to thedocumentarylife.com/academy and discover everything that the Academy has to offer, including a video that takes you inside the Academy for a look around. The Documentary Academy has already greatly helped others realize their power and potential as doc filmmakers. Why not be the next person who brings an awesome documentary film to life? Head on over to thedocumentarylife.com/academy today, and we'll see you there.
Your whole life, society tells you, like, oh, be a man, and you're strong, and you're tough, and margaritas are gay. You know, like, you know, you don't grow up thinking that's the way you are. When you're a kid, you just do, you just act. And then somewhere along the line, everyone loses that.
Something that you see really early on, you know, in the first minute or two to the film, of the intro, there's these beautiful sequences, obviously skateboarding sequences. And before I watched your film, I intentionally, you know, tried not to know too much about the film, and I just assumed it's about, you know, some skateboarding kids and their relationship to the filmmaker. And I am not a skater myself, but as we mentioned earlier in the discussion, I lived in the town, i.e. Portland, Oregon, where skating is absolutely massive. So I couldn't relate necessarily to the skating aspect early on, but as a fellow filmmaker, I was taken by the way in which you shot your skating scenes. There are these long takes. There's a very steady cam, sort of fluid, beautiful, dreamlike quality to it. And I can only assume that you're on a skateboard because, of course, you've been skating for years as well. And in fact, some of these guys looked up to you, that you're skating alongside them. And are you using a glide cam type setup at that time?
It's exactly what it is, the glide cam. And anytime I could, I would run rather than ride, because it just makes you more free to, you know, go up curbs, jump over stairs with them, you know.
Well, you
I mean,
must have practiced for quite a while, because the glide cams that I've used over the years, it's like, okay, good luck. Be anything beyond 10 seconds, forget about it. But you have long, just like I said, these steady cam-esque shots that are beautiful that go on for quite some time. How long were you working with the glide cam, man?
I think it was a solid year
Yeah.
before I mean, it was, but I was doing it, you know, it was partly, you know, learning it during that developmental period where I was going around the country. You know,
Right.
I was really, and by the time I met Kier, you know, it was like, it become really intuitive to me, and I sort of had figured out the rig and like really slimmed it down to the bare necessities.
Ah.
Um, I think it helped having worked with Steadicam operators so much, and just knowing how to balance the rig, how to, you know, the physics behind it, sort of like what lengthening, shortening the post, for example, will do for you. Just these really, you know, neat tricks that Steadicam operators taught me.
And were you talking with these guys? Because of course you're working with them fairly regularly. Were you talking with them then directly about your rig and how you were shooting it? Because I'm curious what a Steadicam operator's response is to somebody, this indie guy who's using the glide cams, right? Because generally they scoff at that sort of thing. But these are your colleagues, so they're not going to scoff at it. They're going to talk you through it, right?
They would. I mean, now I know that they would have talked me through it, but back then I didn't even talk about my documentary. You know, I didn't talk about anything. You know, like I was trained very much to like just shut up, and I was trained,
right.
like,
Well,
you
if
know,
you were a camera intern, I'm sure.
well, not even a camera intern, but as like the assistant, as the Steadicam operator's assistant.
Yeah,
You know, I was
yeah.
taught, like, you know, the best camera assistant, you know, should have, by the end of the film, the DP not even know your name, because that's how good you are. You know.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Another thing that really kind of spoke to me in watching your film, I felt like, I almost want to say the music and the score almost juxtaposed what we were seeing at times. It's just that it's not the kind of music or score one would tend to expect to see with skate video, right? Or footage of skating. And I'd love, like the music in this is beautiful. And again, it lends to that sort of wonderful, dreamlike, and of course it gives it a more cinematic sort of feel throughout. At what point did you know that that's the kind of scoring that you were going to go with, as opposed to, you know, maybe some like hardcore or punk music, which is like what stereotypically you might find to go with skating?
From the beginning. I mean, when I first started cutting, 2012, 2013, you know, it's very much like these ethereal, sort of droney, you know, melodic scores. I mean, but I think that's just a symptom of skateboarding being really insular, to the point where I feel like that, you know, people don't think of it as this really, you know, this multi-layered culture. You know, they see it as this monolith that's like, oh, all skaters listen to punk music, or all skaters listen to.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so like the skateboarding community that I belong to, you know, like really, like I use Cat Power, you know, for my skate videos. I use Bright Eyes for my skate videos, like as a teen. So, and like, you know, other skate videos I saw had more emotional music, and so that was a factor. But, you know, I also wanted to highlight this isn't really about skateboard. Like, I mean, the film maybe has like 10, 12 minutes of skateboarding in it.
Right.
It feels like a lot longer because it's the easiest thing to talk about in the film. There's so many sort of, you know, difficult things that are in the film.
Great point.
So I think that's why people often, you know, sort of gravitate towards the skating.
As a filmmaker, it's always an interesting choice to insert oneself in their own docs, whether it's through narration, whether it's through actually visually being there or being a character. You are a character in this film, both as filmmaker and as Bing Liu. And I'm curious, one of the things that struck me as a storytelling device, and I don't know if this is the spoiler alert time or not. I'm not sure, but we'll say spoiler alert. I don't know. But when did you make the choice to hold off really telling your story or part of your story till about midway through the film. How did that evolve?
I mean, I resisted being in the film. Like, I didn't set out to be
bet.
in the film. I mean, I didn't want to make a personal doc, you know.
Yeah. I'm
But
with you.
it's so, but it, you know, things kept drawing me in, and
Yeah.
ultimately it was, you know, at first it was like, okay, I'll give a little breadcrumb that, you know, like I went through something similar,
Right.
you know, in moments that were not intentional. They just happened to be there, and, you know, interviews of verite. After one of the characters reveals to me that there's been abuse
Yeah.
in, you know, one of the other characters I've been following, I had to really think deeply and ethically about how I was going to proceed.
Right.
And so one of the reasons why I put myself in the film was to, you know, put skin in the game, to show like
wow.
why. I mean, and it's sort of part and parcel with why the filmmaking becomes meta, why you get a peek into the filmmaking as its own story arc.
Oh yeah.
Because when you're dealing with this deeply private issue, you know, yeah, I mean, ultimately it just, I had a reason to, beyond just wanting to put myself in the film or giving backstory as to how my story relates. You know, all of a sudden there was these deeper reasons to do it, and I think a lot of it had to do with women characters really emerging from the film, and you know, ultimately it led me to go interview my mom.
Right, which is one of the obviously more emotional moments in the film. It's difficult to watch, and it's as a fellow doc filmmaker, it's difficult to watch because, you know, of course, in these meta moments when we can see the crew on set and we can see you asking questions to your mom, I'm just thinking, oh man, what is this like for Bing? Because he knows there's questions that he wants to ask his mom, and he's being, not only is he filming her and putting her in a tight situation, he's being filmed himself. That must have been a pretty big day for you. I mean, are you emotionally preparing for that beforehand, or are you just going in and just trying to remain as technical as possible? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely focused on the technical aspects, but the whole, I mean, I was a one-man crew for the whole shoot, except for that one shoot.
Except for that day, yeah.
Yeah, so I hired a sound person and a camera person because I needed to be vulnerable. I needed to show my vulnerability.
Yeah.
I needed to create a situation where I didn't have control. So that was the only way I could do it. You know, I don't think, like, how do you be vulnerable when you're the one in control of the filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
So I did have that in mind, and I was like, well, I need to like just be myself, because otherwise this isn't going to work.
One of the final questions I want to ask you about the film, and again, this is not to give any, you know, true spoilers away, but one of your characters, there's a moment where we may realize something that's extremely revealing about one of your characters, and I wrongfully assumed that you were friends with all these guys, and thank you for correcting me on that in the beginning of the conversation, but I guess. Have these guys seen the film, one? And two, how do you go about, you know, this particular character's name was Zach, knowing what you reveal about Zach on film, as a doc filmmaker, what are you doing to protect yourself in a legal sense about revealing what you reveal? And then again, give me a reaction if these guys have seen the film.
Yeah, I mean, so my approach, you know, like the film is built on very stilted moments that are often very emotionally intense, but, you know, but in reality, you know, so no, and like, you know, it feels like, oh God, they're going to see the film and they're going to like look at this moment and, you know, really hone in on it and focus on it. But in reality, like, it was a 5-year-long conversation with them about, you know, how do you feel about being in the film?
Yeah.
You know, and like I told them early on in the process, we're going to show you the film before we release it, before, you know, we even picture lock it. And so we did, you know, showed everyone, Zach, Nina, Kiera, my mom, brother, separately.
Wow.
And, you know, and like they all were overwhelmed by the honesty of it. And no one wanted anything changed except Nina. Nina wanted to shorten that cell phone recording a little bit.
Okay.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But you know, like that, it was just the result of a long and transparent conversation about, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of the relationships that we form with our subjects when we're spending that kind of time. That's the authenticity comes out. But still, man, that's for those guys to watch it and then all give the okay. That doesn't happen all of the time, you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, I mean, that's the biggest thing. That's one of the biggest things that Kartemquin really helped me on, was just them teaching me like their ethical style of filmmaking, that they always show their participants of the documentary, you know, the film before it's finished, not to give them editorial control, but to give them a chance to earnestly weigh in and, you know, ultimately be on board and be supportive of the project if that's possible. And it wasn't until much later when I found out not all filmmakers do that.
Oh yeah, not at all.
Which you know, and Gordon has said this too. It is really about power. Like if you're doing a film about Anthony Weiner, he doesn't need to see the film before, you know, it comes out. But when you're doing it on disenfranchised people, when you're doing it on people with less power than you, you know, it does. You know, I believe that you should show them the film before it's finished.
We've had a number of people come on from Kartemquin, but I feel like in parts of this conversation, you have revealed more about what that relationship is like between the indie doc filmmaker and Kartemquin than we have had yet, which is brilliant. So I wonder, perhaps in wrapping up, you might be able to share for any of our listeners out there who may have a film that they feel like that they could perhaps send on to Tim or whoever. What would you recommend in terms, how do we approach Kartemquin with our films or our projects?
I mean, they're not like a big corporate, you know, entity in a shiny building downtown.
Yeah,
they're
exactly
like a, they're in like a reconstituted, you know, apartment building, you know, like that was purchased in the 70s that, you know, has creaky floors. They're really approachable. You go on the website. There's an email right there for you to go and, you know, send your project, pitch your project, and they'll, you know, generally they'll get back to you. They meet, I think, every quarter or a few times a year to take a look at these projects that are getting pitched to them, and they decide collectively, you know, like, how can we help these films if we can help them?
Yeah.
Or, you know, so it's a pretty transparent, easy, you know, shouldn't be a scary process.
Right.
They're nice Midwestern people.
Yes, they are. Very nice, very nice. Bing, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you on the program. As we finish up here, is there anything that you would like to add, whether in this conversation or that you could speak to directly in any way to doc filmmakers?
I just want to give a shout out to Steve James for giving me my big professional doc break when he hired me to do America to Me,
Yes.
to direct and shoot 3 stories for America to Me. And then for, you know, afterwards, when I asked him to come on as an EP, him, you know, really agreeing to do that.
We had Steve on the program on basically the eve of the Academy Awards, which was amazing to talk with him at that time. And he's coming back on here. We're going to speak with him in October to speak with this new project that you were obviously also a part of. So I'll make sure to let Steve know. Bing, thank you so much for being on The Documentary Life. What a pleasure. What a great conversation about doc filmmaking and doc living as a whole. You were a great person to talk to on these subjects.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Don't forget, we'd love to have you join us in the Documentary Academy. Come and take a look at how we can help you make your best documentary film at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. That's thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.